Here's a look at your market recap on this Friday, the 9th day of May. It's Friday, so we'll take a look at everything that happened this week. And of course, we got a lot to get through. We'll start off with the tracking formulas. The Missouri feeder cattle formula. On Friday, based on roughly a 550-pound steer through the auction barns in the state of Missouri. Friday's value at $389.23. That was 22 cents lower than the all-time new record set on Thursday. Then the CME feeder cattle index, based on an 800-pound steer up through the 12-state feeding region, 296.14. That's about 20 cents below the all-time record high that was set mid last week. Feedlot trade, of course, the southern trade took place early in the week this week. Northern trade, it developed mostly on Wednesday and Thursday. Total 80,312 head of confirmed negotiated sales at the 2 o'clock cutoff report time on Friday. Might have been a handful of more sales that took place after that. Pretty unlikely, though, as most of that trade was on Wednesday and Thursday. We'll get the final numbers, of course, Monday morning with the weighted averages. In the South this week, Texas reported 10,800 head, a really big week for trade in Texas, 218 to 220 there. Kansas, they reported about 8,000 head, 219 to 221. Iowa, 25,800 head. Trade there, quite the range, as there was a handful of sales early, but the prices increased as they held out till later in the week. Live sales were anywhere from 220 up to 230. Most of the sales at 225 to 228. Dress trade anywhere from 352 up to 363. Most of the sales dressed were reported at 355. In Nebraska, 23,600 head, kind of the same story there. Live sales from 223 to 228, with most at 225 to 228. Dress sales 355 to 360, with most of the sales at 355. Box beef cutout values, although they closed a bit lower on Friday, they were higher for the week. Choice closed at $345.97. That was down $1.92 for the day, but up $3.07 for the week. Select closed on Friday afternoon at $331.17, down $2.03 for the day, but up $5.82 for the week. The Choice Select spread setting at $14.80, and volume on Friday, 105 loads of cuts, trimmings, and grinds. Estimated daily livestock slaughter for the week, including Saturday's numbers. Cattle, 559,000 head. The chains pretty much slowed down and are basically going to be at a stop on Saturdays. They keep that number at the exact same as it was last week. Hog slaughter, including Saturday's numbers, 2,437,000 head for the week. Taking a look at the auction barns around the state this week, when all said and done, going to end up with about 41,000 head. There was a couple very notable things this week, and we'll get to those here shortly. Near 60% of this week's offering was under 600 pounds on the feeders. It was extremely hard to find very many big drafts of calves this week. Most of them coming to the barns in gooseneck loads as best. Sure, not very many, if any, pot loads on any of those lightweights. Of course, the price ranges on some of those featherweight calves getting quite wide as the prices get higher and higher. We're seeing some pretty good spreads there. The steer-heifer spread, or steer-heifer ratio this week, we had 45% heifers, not quite as much as last week, but still enough to really discourage any kind of thoughts of any kind of retention. A lot of loads of big heifers this week, and we'll talk about those here shortly. Taking a look at some of the stick-out sales around the state, 23 head of 336-pound lightweight steer calves at Callaway Livestock Center sold at $517. 36 head of 418-pound steers at Windsor Livestock Auction, $467.50. 23 head of 456-pound steers at Joplin Regional Stockyards at $465. 28 head of 526 pounds at South Central Regional Stockyards, $435. The weight average price for all of those light 5 weights for the state this week still over $4 at $404. South Central Regional Stockyards had several stick-out sales of calves this week as they had their special sale. A lot of those calves will end up out in the Flint Hills on grass for the summer. Another stick-out sale, 32 head, 578-pound steers at South Central Regional Stockyards for $399, and another 20 head, 615 pounds at the same barn, $387.50. Lawley Brothers Livestock Market in Macon, they sold 21 head of 650-pound steers at $370.75. Callaway Livestock Center had a full load of 724-pound steers for $329. The weight average price statewide on those light 7 weights this week at $321. Kingsville Livestock Auction, they sold 181 head of 776-pound steers at $322.50. Ozarks Regional Stockyards in West Plains, far south central Missouri, a full load of 812-pound steers at $308. And then Tina Livestock Market, a full load of 904-pound steers at $289 and a quarter. Taking a look at the heifers, 36 head of 536-pound heifers at Green Sea Livestock Market brought $368. The average price statewide on those 5 to 550-pound heifers this week at $356. Taking a look at those 7-weight heifers, had a full 10 loads of light 700-pound heifers sold at the auction barns around the state this week. Now, this wasn't 10 loads that were put together by buyers. This was 10 full pot loads in the offerings around the state. At Kingsville Livestock Auction, they sold 142 head of 709-pound heifers at an even $320. The weight average price on those light 7 weights this week at $312. And then the 750 to 799-pound heifers around the state this week, 22 full pot loads of those heifers were sold at the auction barns, and nearly all of those heifers headed to feed. Taking a look at the futures markets, live cattle for the week, mostly $2 higher. Feeder cattle, they closed mostly $3 higher. Of course, the notable thing there was that August contract. That marks when all of those cattle will be coming off of the Flint Hills this fall, and it broke the $3 mark and did close just slightly over it for the week. Lean hogs for the week down about $2. On Friday, June live cattle up 42 cents at $214.67. August at $209.57, down 42. October $206.95, down 52. Feeder cattle for May up 50 cents, $297.97. August closed at $300.30, down 95 cents for the day. And September $299.02, down 120. Lean hogs for May, $90.37, down 27. June at $97.57, up 40. And July, $100.42, up 17. Turning our attention to the grain markets at the elevators around the state on Friday. Soybean bids for the week, 6 to 12 lower. Wheat was 13 to 21 lower. And corn, 16 to 22 lower. A lot of that pressure this week was kind of based on the weather as much as anything. Of course, we still have all of the global issues going on, but a lot of that was just based on pressure from the weather, as we did have a pretty good planting week across the nation this week. Expect there was a lot of crops put in the ground. Corn in the elevators in the St. Louis region on Friday, $465. Kansas City, $419 to $454. Soybeans, St. Louis, $1063. Kansas City, $1031 to $1076. Wheat bids, St. Louis, $511 to $516. Kansas City at $501. On the Board of Trade, corn contracts, May closed up 2.5 on Friday at $441.5. July up 4 up 2 1/4 at 449 3/4. September up 2 3/4 at 429 1/4. May soybeans 7 1/4 higher, 1044. July at 1051 3/4 up 6 3/4. August at 1047 1/4 up 7 1/4. The first 3 months of the wheat contracts were all down 7.5 cents. May at 505 1/2. July at 521 3/4. September at 536 1/2. Soybean meal for May down 60 cents a ton at 287.20. Soybean oil for May 48.15 a hundredweight up 12 cents. With the Missouri Department of Agriculture, that's a recap of your markets for Friday. This is Tony Hancock.